Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Risk Matters, where we will be discussing with our chairman, Claes Norgren, who is in Stockholm. Klaus, welcome. So we'll pick up on this sort of recurring theme of European competitiveness and the role of Europe in the world these days. The European Commission came out with a paper called Europe's Independence Moment, which of course I find a little interesting that a continent that's been around since the time of the ancient Greeks is in 2026 talking about independence. But I guess it's a sign of the times with things changing, especially with the relationship with the US, the relationship with Russia, of course, which of course is no relationship, and then everything that's also going on east of that with Asia and China and so forth. And we'll talk about sort of three broad themes: banking, energy, and then we'll also close with entrepreneurship, because obviously these are three elements that are very important to the future success, hopefully, of Europe. But Klaus, why don't we get started a little bit with your perspectives on banking and the banking union and sort of how banking fits in with the overall competitiveness goals of the European Commission.
Sure. But perhaps before going into that, I think just some words and reflections on the independence theme, as you mentioned. I think that it's a bit odd, as you say, using the word independence. But I mean, I think there is so much fundamentals changing, and I read the word independence as the need and also the wish to for Europe to be on a standalone basis. I think many of us have been living through the decades before with an increased international integration, cooperation, etc. But I think now we are in a position where this has dramatically changed. So I think it's necessary that Europe, and for that matter also the European Commission, adds policy problems, the way how to set the foot forward on a standalone basis. I think it's with a lot of regret we are here, but we must face the reality. So from that perspective, I think that this is a good communication. It's political high level. The question is really, is this sufficient or not? It's necessary, but is it really sufficient?
So it seems to me that there's a lot of discussion and that the policymakers are all thinking about things as they should. But is there any sort of shift in thinking, or is it going to be sort of directionally more of the same? Because obviously someone would say that if you want to change your predicament, trying to do similar things to what you did before it may not yield the preferable results that you're trying to go after. So do you see any shifts or say sort of improvements in the way of thinking?
Well, I think that what lies underneath, and one of the challenges, it ties with the questions you raised about the banking sector. I think if we look at the developments as they have been taking place, if we broaden the perspective from the banking sector as such to the whole financial sector, we are in a phase of transition where we have to do a lot of things. Clearly, the investment in the defense and security sectors will create a big strain on government budgets. I mean, to make a reality of the 5% of defense spending of GDP, I think that will consume a lot of resources. In parallel to that, we have the build of infrastructure where that needs to take place for Europe on a standalone basis to be more self-sufficient and to have a greater security. And then you might ask, what are the prerequisites to achieve that in the financial markets? And I think that it's not feasible only to do this by borrowing. Many of the European countries are already highly leveraged. So there is one way out of this, and that is to increase savings and to be able to kind of finance all the borrowing in a responsible way, and to make the euro the building block for Europe. So I think that we need to see that there will be new channels for savings. I think that in the Draghi report that we have been discussed in this channel before, there was clearly the recommendation, and that savings in Europe will not be channeled in the same way as before to the other banking balance sheet, but there is a need to have investments from private individuals, companies in risk capital and fund, and so there is a structural change in the banking sector that needs to take place, and of course that needs to be demand driven, but I think there are all sorts of regulations that makes it difficult for that to happen. So the European Commission, as it's flagging, I think it sets the right pace forward.
Now, what do you sort of see on the horizon? For example, in terms of consolidation, perhaps in the banking sector, is that something that we keep hearing about it, and there were going to be some mergers that were going to take place? A, is that desirable, and B, do you think it would happen if it is?
Well, I think it should be a good development if there is wider possibilities for consolidation. But I mean, the European banking sector cannot only be reliant on a few banks, and it's not. So Europe is a wide continent and will have a diversified banking system. So given that, I think it's feasible and also a good direction if there are better degrees of freedom to merge banks in Europe. At the same time, as the real thing that needs to be happening is that fund management and also savings in the forms of shares will be facilitated, and capital markets play an important role in that.
Klaus, maybe let's we can shift a little bit, and I know we had discussed prior to this, sort of talking about energy, and obviously energy is crucial to the growth of any economy. I was just seeing, literally before we started, I saw a headline in the Financial Times, and it was a statement by Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, who said that in his opinion, China will win the AI race because it has lower energy costs and fewer regulations than the US does. He didn't mention Europe, of course, but he mentioned, the main competitor to China on the AI side. So energy is obviously very important for sort of several reasons, including for technology, without which it's going to be very difficult to compete. How do you see the sort of energy landscape in terms of regulation, in terms of the grid, infrastructure costs, and so forth? I know it's a lot to sort of unpack in one question, but just give us your sort of overview of the energy picture.
Well, there are a number of components here. One is the kind of infrastructure situation in Europe in energy markets. I think it's a common theme across Europe that the grids and needs to be enhanced and upgraded. There are a number of important bottlenecks that makes energy prices vary and there is a need to take down prices by reducing the bottlenecks and improving the grids. So I think that is well identified, and I think that that is something that needs to be high on the agenda. Then, if we look at Europe and the situation given the shutdown on nuclear power plants in Germany, and also the loss of gas from Russia. Clearly, there needs to be investments in new capacity. And if we look at how that will be done, I think that new forms of energy like solar is an important new element. It's fascinating to see how big the investments have become in China. And I am of the opinion that this will drive down the cost of electricity as these investments, not only in China, but in around the Mediterranean and other parts of Europe where there's a lot of sun, it will become much more cheap energy. And I think that the carbon will have to face a stiff competition. So from that perspective, I think on the supply side, there are good hopes of driving down the energy prices. And I think that regardless of whatever political point of view you might have on these matters, there is a market reality that comes here. On the other hand, sun does not always shine in many places, so you need to have access to kind of base energy. And the carbon energy sources have been one important way of achieving that. But I think there is a renaissance also for nuclear power, which will take also a lot of investments. So I think that there will be, if we look forward, a transition to new sources. There will be new relative prices, and at the same time, with development of AI and also infrastructure, there will be also an increased demand. But I think there is then a transition that needs to be made here, which is important.
And, and of course, in the Eastern Mediterranean, there's talk of all of this sort of energy cooperation between the countries to the east of the European Union. So all of the energy finds in the Eastern Mediterranean, passing, I guess, through from Greece and from Cyprus, Greece, and also sort of going into Europe. So we'll see how that goes, because obviously, as you said, there's a political element to a lot of these things when it comes to energy, because it's not just obviously the size of the investments is such that it's impossible for it only to to be based on what the private sector does. Klaus, I think let's if we finish on energy, maybe sort of talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and kind of risk capital, and kind of how you see, and again maybe even connecting it a little bit back to our sort of earlier discussion on banking. We keep seeing that the major investments in entrepreneurship are still in the US and Silicon Valley, and now increasingly in the Middle East. There's a lot going on in Saudi and the UAE and so forth. What should policymakers be thinking about when it comes to encouraging risk capital and risk taking within the European Union, which will also spur entrepreneurship as well?
Well, there are some aspects that I think are important in that regard. We touched upon that already before, the need to channel savings to make entrepreneurs being able to tap markets for risk capital. I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurs might be private individuals who kind of, in a minor scale, develop the business and grows, but they're in this path towards uh, uh, developing small and medium-sized companies that is really at the core of the entrepreneurship. There needs to be a capital market, risk capital supply for these small companies. I think that's important. Then, of course, on many people's mind are the questions about red tape, regulation, blocking, or at least raising the bar and the cost for entrepreneurs to conduct their business. I think there is a real problem in Europe in many sectors and in many public sector applications that there are too much regulation. I think there needs to be action taking place here. And it's interesting to note that in this independence program, independence moment, as the European Commission put it, they have flagged the importance to streamline reporting and to reduce the regulatory burden. The problem in this area is that we've heard it before, and we see the omnibus work taking place in Europe, which I think is a good direction to take. But this is really something that shouldn't be underestimated, the difficulty in actually cutting back on regulations. In many countries in Europe, we have seen and heard this before, and sometimes I think the verdict has been that there's a lot of talk and no action. So if you put a number of bureaucrats in a room and you ask them to take away the rules they have already drafted, it's difficult to get enthusiasm in the bureaucracy. So I think the politicians here really must take the lead, because you couldn't expect the inventors of the regulations to disinvent themselves.
And I would say, Klaus, now also to put in a little plug for some of the work that we're doing as well on the entrepreneurship side, and increasingly on the technology sector, which we will announce at the appropriate time. We were always thinking about where sort of the next fundraising round would come from, and so forth. The funny thing is that Europe, the European Commission, and the sort of from state funds, there's a lot of money that has been poured into entrepreneurship by the government, not the risk capital that you talk about in terms of VCs and the private sector. And I don't know because I don't think a problem in Europe is that there isn't enough capital, because there's all these Horizon 2030 and all these different programs that are there. I think it may be a misallocation of it, in the sense that instead of sort of VCs and private investors making large decisions, it may be that people that work in the government are doing that. Perhaps they're not as focused as they should be on profitability and of success on that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh and unfair on that. But as I said, it doesn't seem to be that it's a problem of lack of actual money. Maybe it's also an allocation issue. But what do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, no, my view is that this is really an allocation issue. Um,
Yeah.
that the money should be in the right place, and then there is the question of abundance of that. And if you go back to the kind of basics in all this from a macroeconomic perspective, it's the question of having a sufficient savings ratio in countries that could make sure that the supply of savings are channeled to the right sources.
Yeah. And I think, look, I mean, the good news, I guess, is that, you know, if you go back to first principles, there are a lot of, you know, well-educated people in Europe and a lot of ideas that, you know, can be commercialized. So the sort of initial fodder or the start of it is all there for sure within Europe. It's now, you know, sort of taking it up to the next level, and let's hope that you know, that improves over the coming years. Klaus, anything else you want to cover, or should we wrap it up?
I think we have taken a big tour around Europe and many of the challenging questions. So I think that's fine.
And we sit in different tips of Europe. I'm in the southeastern part, and you're in the sort of north central part. So I guess even geographically between the two of us, we cover that. But with that, let me thank you very much for your time, Klaus, and for everybody else. If you like this episode, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you.